Hello, my name is Ryan Maeda. Thank you for coming to this presentation, which is State of the Union Virtual Production. We're going to step through a wide range of features that are, kind of come from the film and TV world, but have, hopefully a wide-ranging impact across all the different things that Unreal Engine is used for. So we'll start with the rendering pipeline. So previously on Movie Render Queue, we've been working on this movie render graph setup, and as part of that, we've gone through the process of decriminalizing compositing and making sure that the engine is able to produce elements that are suitable for post-production. This is one of my favorite presentation graphics I've ever made, so I'm getting one more use out of it. Since we've now shipped the feature, right? But in the 5.4 release, we moved the kind of stack-based preset system in Movie Render Queue, and we shifted it over to like a graph-based paradigm, right? So we kind of flipped the existing settings on their head, keeping a relatively simple base setup, but then we also introduced more sophisticated concepts like collections and modifiers, and these are the things that drive your ability to isolate, just the character or just the background or just certain elements, separate them from the background and produce separate elements that can be composited together in post. And so in 5.4, we shipped this out, right? So hopefully people are starting to get into it. It's a feature set that we worked really hard on and we're really excited about. And there's a big range of new stuff coming, stemming from the initial release, with the focus areas, there are kind of three main things. There's first, just continuing to advance the rendering features. There were certain things that didn't quite work the way you would expect, and we're just kind of iterating through all of the different things that the engine can render, making sure those things work and are friendly with render layers. We also got a ton of feedback just from artists and trying to make a really artist-friendly tool to set up these a range of simple, sophisticated scenes. And then kind of last but not least, we've been looking at a lot of the parity aspects as well. So making sure that everything that the previous Movie Render Queue can be accomplished in the graph as well, right? So stepping through this, first thing to note are heterogeneous volumes. So this is an example of a type of asset that would be really great to render in separate layers for post purposes. You can take a big shot like this that I re-rendered from Fortnite that has this awesome VDB-based sim, and now you're able to hold out the sim, send it just the background over to the compositor, and then also isolate just the dust cloud itself. This was something that wasn't quite working in the previous release, and it's an example of something that we've been able to improve in this release to support all asset types. Another example of something that was really a common hurdle in the previous release was translucent objects. So we had limited support for translucent things. If you look at anybody's scene, you're likely to find a lot of translucent stuff. And so in the previous release, we had issues like this, right? So in this shot from the Mircat, if you held out, the Mircat, the alpha would have the eyes in it because they were translucent, and obviously this is not something that your compositor would be happy with. And in 5.5, this is something that's been addressed, right? So an example of this would be a car shot, like this was shown in the keynote, but if you're looking at this, the new support will allow you to make a mask easily for just the windshield in this simple example, right? And then you'd also be able to isolate the glass really easily if you're going to further adjust that in post. So this is a long way of saying we've made a real emphasis and we're proud to say that essentially all asset types are supported for render layers, right? So this also includes Niagara, which was reliant on some of these issues being solved with translucent objects. We also support landscape and sky atmosphere without a sky sphere. So there's different ways that the sky atmosphere can be set up, and now we support both ways. On the settings side, another thing that was a common pain point with the initial rollout of render layers was spawnables. So if you look at any cinematic or anything with shots in it, you're going to find a lot of spawnables. And so this was a problem for isolating them because they're transient and the system was not able to grab on to something that was spawned. And so in this release, you're able to reference transient actors by name. So instead of having to go through and put tags or come up with some convoluted system for finding all the spawnables that you want to isolate in a render layer, you're just able to use their name. So you don't need to use these kind of tag workarounds. It's that were cumbersome to set up. And we aim to support explicit actor references in a future release. We're working with the sequencer team on being able to pick a specific spawnable as well as just reference them by name. But we thought it was important to do the name thing just so that you don't have to do any additional setup within your actual within the level itself to use them in layers. On the media output side, we've moved over the ProRes and Avid DNxHR options to the graph. And as part of this, we've also improved the output quality and options for these. So we moved these over, but with a lot of the stuff that we're trying to to transition from the preset system to the graph, we're also like seeking out these opportunities to make each one of these little component features better. So for Apple ProRes and ZNXHR, we offer like all of the standard quality options. So if you've ever used these outputs before, they were previously hard-coded to just one option. Now we support all of the options so that if you're rendering out editorial media from the engine directly, like the flavor of choice for your editor is available. And then also on the editorial side, we've ensured that timecode support is proper for these outputs, right? So if you have timecode and sequencer, the editorial media that's ProRes or Avid DNX will have the timecode embedded in it to match whatever you have in sequencer. Metadata is another important part of a rendering pipeline, and this is something that's been added for EXR. So there's a node that you can just drop in and set like key value pairs for your metadata. This is a good way to configure custom attributes, and those will just automatically get written into the EXR when you output it. It also simplifies the way you might do this in a pipeline, so instead of having to write some Python that like waits for the render to finish and then sticks the metadata in, like your Python script can just add a node and put it all in there, and we take care of all of the heavy lifting. Just wanted to give a shout out to Weta. I don't know if anybody from Weta is here, or maybe they'll be watching, but this is something that Weta worked on. They contributed back to the engine, and it was just a nice feature add that they helped us out with. So I want to give them a shout out. Console variables is another thing we focused on, right? So render settings are very commonly console variables, and dialing these things in correctly is an important part of getting good output from Movie Render Queue. So to that end, we've made some adjustments. So if you're using a console variable preset, we now list out all of the console variables that are in it and their values, just to give you a little bit more transparency over what's being set. We've also made some small adjustments that kind of go a long way towards reducing clicks and simplifying things. So if you want to expose a console variable as a movie render graph variable that the artist can change, at submission time, we automatically name it. We automatically set the default value. So then it'll show up here on the graph, right? So if you set the graph up, maybe you want to have this laid out in a way where the artist doesn't have to open it up, but they have common settings that they may want to adjust. This gives you a way to kind of surface that up. Give it the right name, give it the right default value without any mistakes. And then another thing that we've added to the queue window is the ability to just set a console variable as an override. So this is really handy for quick testing, right? So you don't have to open the graph to test the new CVAR that may or may not fix your render. So it's kind of a small thing. I feel like console variables have become a little bit of a pet project of mine. And I think in all cards on the table, it can be hard to find what the right console variable is. And I think from a tools development standpoint, something that I've really prioritized with our team is just making it easier to manage them. These CVARs go a long way, and anything we can do to make them easier to set, easier to find, helps people get good output. This was mentioned in the keynote, but I just wanted to call it out. There's some updates to the path tracer temporal denoiser, right? So this is kind of an extreme example going from bottom to top of no denoising. And then now we have this new temporal denoiser, which is built into Movie Render Graph. And so if you are using the path tracer, we encourage you to try it out. We think that you're going to get a lot better results. Object IDs is an example of another thing we've moved over. So the previous ability to export object IDs as part of your render is now available in the graph as well. And then we also added support for rendering all cameras in the graph. So this is a multi-camera setup, common in an automotive type of thing where you set up all these cameras in the scene. You want to render them all at the same time. This wasn't supported in the graph in the last round, but we've moved it over. Other small but mighty things, so this is something that we spent a lot of time on, a lot of little things getting added up here, but start and console commands are now available as a graph node. A lot of people drive logic via Blueprint as part of their scene setup, so these are available in the graph. Script tags is a pipeline-centric feature that that makes it easier for a script to find the right node if it needs to adjust it, hopefully making it easier for TDs to build things out in their pipeline. And reference motion blur is also available for the path tracer now. Looking ahead to the next release, we kind of envisioned this feature as a 3-release cycle of 5.4, 5.5, and 5.6. So what we're aiming to do in the next release is hit full parity with the legacy preset system and call Movie Render Graph production ready. One of the big missing features that we haven't moved over yet is the high-res and panoramic options. These are things that we want to spend a lot of time on and improve, specifically improve from where they are now. If you've tried these out, you probably have run into things like memory issues and just it's it's not a stable system, or to the level that we would hope. And so this is going to get a lot of emphasis in the next round to make sure that when we move it to the graph, the high-res and panoramic options work a lot better. And then kind of last but not least, introducing some quick render concept. I don't know if that's what we're going to actually call it, but thinking about like how many clicks it takes to go from like I'm in sequencer to I want to render, hopefully getting to a place where there's like a one-click option that just renders immediately. That's from a UX standpoint. We've invested really heavily in being able to do these fancy graphs that are really sophisticated. So we want to kind of balance things out in the opposite direction to make things faster, easier, and just like a smoother user experience for rendering in the engine. On the Linux side, for anyone using Linux, there's some housekeeping here, which is that we've moved away from supporting CentOS. If you're a Linux-centric studio, you're probably aware of what's going on with CentOS in general. The industry has, for film at least, has moved towards like this, established some guidelines, some recommendations, specifically that people move towards Rocky 9. And so that's something that we've adopted as well. A lot of times when people ask us, how we can make Unreal on Linux better, like using newer Linux actually helps us a lot. Like as a real-time system, staying on these older components can really slow things down, and the newer components will oftentimes run faster. So it's just something to be aware of. And then as of this release, we're kind of making an official move away from CentOS entirely. Also on the Linux side, I think they touched on this in the keynote, but Vulkan ray tracing is now enabled by default. It's essentially reached full parity as a starting point. So like we're really interested and eager to have some production start to try to use it, start to like make it even more refined and robust going forward. Switching over to ICVFX, quick recap of a couple features that we had in the last release that we're really proud of. The first one is depth of field compensation. So this is a really cool feature, one of my faves, I would say. By far, like thinking back to when we worked on first season of Mandalorian, there was this moment where Greg Fraser he came over to us and he was like, hey, so when the movie camera films the wall, like everything is the same level of defocus, right? Even if it's in the render and it's going behind, because the real camera is just seeing everything on the wall the same. And it was something that always stuck with us. Obviously, we weren't able to do it at the time. But in 5.4, we introduced some new features to the render that allow it to compensate, because we know where the camera is, we know everything about the lens and all of its characteristics. And then we also know where the wall is. So we're able to make these adjustments. And the result is a much more realistic depth of field that allows people to ideally people are just running with it all the time. But in the past, you were either turning it off entirely or getting a double blur, and this is something that we've addressed with this compensation feature. On the 2110 side, we also introduced this inner Frustum split feature, right? So using 2110 to slice and dice the renders up a little bit more, it allows for additional resources to be thrown at the in-camera pixels in the inner Frustum. So instead of having to render this with one machine, you're able to like split it up, potentially throw multiple resources at it. Like a simple example would be just dividing it into two. But we've seen some other people try to go even higher res and push more hardware towards the inner Frustum. And so with 2110, you're able to split this up even more. For really, really large volumes, doing really, really wide shots, like that resolution can potentially make a difference. And so it's cool that we're able to give people more flexibility to throw more GPUs at it if they really want. Looking ahead here for 5.5, like the main emphasis has been on continuing to get 2110 solid. So in this release, we're feeling really confident about the NVIDIA RiverMax setup. We're calling it production ready. We're starting to see studios begin to adopt it. A lot of I wasn't sure what to put here visually, right? Because a lot of it is just like making sure it's in sync and all of these like lower level technical features that the end result is that the wall looks the same. But you're able to do that more efficiently. You're maybe able to have a more sophisticated scene. Like there's a lot of efficiencies that 2110 brings. And so we're happy to say that we think it's ready to go. Also on the 2110 side, we're beginning to work with other hardware partners. So one of them is Matrox. Matrox makes a ton of gear that people already have, especially in the broadcast world. And so we're kind of starting, now that we feel really solid about the RiverMax setup, we're going to start iterating through these other 2110 cards to make sure that they have support as well. So Matrox is the next one up. There's also going to be a panel that I'll plug here, but if you're interested in it, they're going to be talking about the AMD and Matrox-based 2110 setup for in-camera VFX. There's also a booth in the near the Dev Hub downstairs that you can check out as well. But the team from AMD and Megapixel and Matrox are going to be talking about this with me tomorrow. On the usage side, a lot of a lot of what we've done for in-camera VFX to date has been on like refining the core components. And one of the cool things that we've been able to do now that things are more solid is that we're able to focus on making things nice. So this is an example of something that every time I go watch operators, it's tripped them up, right? So being able to manage level visibility. So operators will like have stuff in sublevels, they'll hide and unhide them, and they weren't able to do that in end-display. It was just really hard. We had these C-bars to like try to sync it. It was a really, really common pain point. And so we worked with the editor team. We finally got this like simple column that I think will go a really long way for operator happiness. Right, so in the levels panel, you can now expose a game visibility column, and so this will show you the state of it, right? So you'll be able to toggle these things live as long as they're loaded, right? And then there's just a little basic eyeball, and this will let operators toggle the visibility live in end display. I hope that and on a personal level, I look forward to not having to answer another support ticket related to the level visibility not working. And so, this is, it's one of those things that I've just always wanted to do. It's just, so we're in there. And here's another example of a refinement, like when people start to really massage the light cards and work with their DPs on it, we have this ability to have, the light cards either over or under the inner frustum. Right, so this is an example where you could set the default to be under the inner frustum, which is generally the common case, but every once in a while, you may need to put one over in a corner. So now you have the ability to like opt out. So on a per light card basis, you can go over or under. Another thing to talk about is content plugins. So we'll see how this fares. But like if with any of the stages that you'll see, like projects come and go, right? So one day maybe you're filming a camping scene, right? Another day, like you might be filming a Western. On a third day, you'll be in the city, you'll be in an underpass, and maybe on another shoot day, you'll be playing chess. Right, and so like what you end up having to do for a stage is like you're getting all these projects. They're probably coming from different partners or different productions that are just sending you these projects. Right, so what you end up having to do is you have to recreate all of your content in like over and over. Right, so you have an end display, you have a stage level, you have your camera track, and you have a whole bunch of stuff that's like always used on every project. Right, so then you got to copy it over here. Maybe you make a change and then you copy it. Like these things get out of sync. And the idea here would be that you can wrap them up into a plugin, right? So we use this internally. We have a plugin that we put all of our stuff in. It's called Stage Essentials. You can call it whatever you want. This is just an example based on our own life. But what we have now is this ability to have additional plugin directories, right? And so like this feature existed before, but we've made a small change that makes it more accessible. So in any project, you can just open this up in the plugins folder, and now there's this place to define an additional place to look for plugins that travels around with your project, right? You don't have to set an environment variable. You don't have to remember a command line argument. You can still do that if you want to, but this just puts it into the U project. It's always going to be there. So wherever you move the U project to, it's going to find it. And so like we encourage stages to check this out, this stuff kind of drives me crazy as well. Like we have different projects. Sometimes we change the end display in one and then that change is not in the other one. And we get really confused and we waste a lot of time doing that. So this is an example of a feature that we prioritize because we believe this is going to make stages run more efficiently. It's also applicable to Vcam stages, performance capture stages, really anything, right? So anything that you have reusable, even if you don't do any of this virtual production stuff, like you may just have stuff blueprints that you use across all the different projects. All these things that are reusable, I encourage you to check out this content plugin idea and start to manage those so that you don't have to copy stuff over from project to project over and over again. On the iOS side for Unreal Stage, a couple minor things, like if in a project where you have a lot of light cards, you may notice that it gets cluttered with a lot of pins. It becomes really hard to pick the pin that you want. So we have a show only selected option. This kind of drills it down, makes it easier to select the light card that you want to move. We've also added some additional support for color correction regions in the app. So now we have transform controls. You can add CCRs instead of CCWs, or in addition, I should say. And you can move those around with the XYZ transform sliders. On the plate playback side, we have a new feature called Holdout Composite. And the idea behind this feature is that this uses the holdout setup that we developed for Movie Render Queue, and essentially like punches a hole through the scene when you play a plate and just puts the plate back on. So a lot of times you may have to run, you may have these artifacts, related to things like TSR or some of the other engine features that affect the plates. And so if you use the Holdout Composite, this just plays the plate as is. It's potentially a good option if you're using Unreal for plate playback. Looking ahead, we're kind of starting to shift gears and start looking to some new workflows beyond just the LED wall. And so in 5.6, we're hoping to make some improvements on the live compositing side, specifically some simulcam tools, kind of refreshing some of the older feature sets like composure, figuring out how we're going to do a good, a modern implementation of that. So targeting relatively basic setups like ARB comps or potentially these AR style graphics. It's something that we're starting to research. Our rendering team has been working really hard to help us out. And then a lot of the work that we've done for post-compositing is going to be applicable. So some of the rendering updates we've made, we believe that we're in a better position to tackle live compositing, and so that's going to become a priority in future releases. Another thing to mention on the artist side is the color grading panel. So if you've used the in-camera VFX editor, you might have noticed that we've introduced these kind of grading tools. And in the 5.5 release, we've promoted those up. So this is now available to across the engine. You can always open this color grading panel. This is one of my favorite features as well. I'm really happy that we're able to make these features that are really nice for artists. So it's something that always bothered me when you're grading, which everybody does in every scene. You've got to go into the details panel and you've got to scroll it down, and you can never tell if you're on global or shadows. So this is like a much more intuitive, this is what, I just feel like this is what color grading UIs are supposed to look like, You can see them all at the same time. You can grade your post-process volume or your cine camera or anything that can be color graded, right? And also lets you manage the CCRs. If you poke at any scene that uses color correction regions, you're probably gonna find a lot. Oftentimes there's tens, maybe even hundreds in there. So managing those, syncing the selection with the outliner to move them. This is a dedicated tool for color grading. On the XR side, right? So we're continuing to advance our virtual scouting tools. The XR creative framework that was introduced a couple releases ago has gone to production ready. I think the main improvement here is the gizmo system. The editor team has made some improvements to gizmos that we were able to leverage in VR. So these are much more comfortable ways of moving things. I feel like whenever I was VR scouting, I tried to move something, I would never be able to move it the right way, right? So this, as you can see in this video, it's an example of how you get this nicer, fine-grained movement. Also on the kind of AR XR side, I wasn't quite sure how to categorize this, but there's a new plugin called Livelink OpenVR. And so it's a little bit confusing. I'll try to explain it, but it's targeted at the puck, right? So everybody's seen these pucks. They're oftentimes the way people learn camera tracking for the first time. And with the transition to OpenXR, there were a bunch of problems with the prior Livelink XR plugin. And so it turns out that there's this other framework that you can use called OpenVR, this allows this has better support for the pucks basically, and you can run it headless. It's not as cumbersome to set up. So if you are a production that uses these pucks, the OpenVR plugin will work a lot better. It kind of brings it back to this classic, the classic standards comic where the devs had to explain to me what the difference between OpenVR and OpenXR is. And this is totally one of these things, right? I thought we were supposed to be using OpenXR, and then it turns out there's an OpenVR. But the reality is that the pucks are going to work better with OpenVR, and so that's why we support it. On Livelink Hub, we have third-party plugin support, right? So Livelink Hub now allows for the third-party plugins to be external, right? So all of the different performance capture plugins like Motive, Shogun, Makopi, et those can all be externalized. So if you're doing performance capture in UEFN, you're able to plug and play these things much easier. And then this is kind of starting to give rise. Livelink Hub is a really foundational piece for what's coming next. For some of the performance capture stuff. Timecode was also an emphasis on the performance capture side. Like in this release, you're able to see sequencers timecode in the viewport. The animation asset editor now displays timecode, which I didn't realize it didn't do before. Livelink subject take recordings now receive timecode tracks. And we have media timecode support in sequencer, right? So a lot of this kind of groundwork stuff is like, you know, for people that know timecode, you're probably looking at this and you're like, yeah, it's supposed to do that, and that's true. But the reality is that it didn't do it yet, and we needed to address it. I forgot the subframe thing, but we also support subframes in Take Recorder now. This is kind of like building towards what will become a real point of emphasis, like going forward, right? So we've spent a lot of time with like the groundwork, with Livelink Hub, you know, these kind of timecode examples. And performance capture is going to become a feature set that we want to elevate to the kind of in-camera VFX toolset level within the engine. We think that performance capture is a critical part for real-time animation, right? So the ability to use the real-time nature of Unreal, capture something live in the moment with real people. And it's also equivalently important for us to make sure that the performance capture the performance capture that's recorded feeds into the in-engine animation tools as much as possible. So this is being led by Richard Graham. He's not at Unreal Fest. But I think next year he will probably be standing where I am, because our feature set's going to be very performance capture centric. Looking ahead, like the key areas of development are the introduction of a mocap manager. Like this will be a dedicated UX for performance capture operators. Kind of thinking like how we did for in-camera VFX. There's a dedicated experience for the stage operator. It's going to be a similar idea, but for performance capture. The connection animation is going to be critical, right? We want you to be able to start with performance capture and seamlessly continue with in-engine animation. And then last but not least is Take Recorder, right? So Take Recorder is something that we've always wanted to revisit. And it's something that we'll be spending a lot of time on to make sure that Take Recorder is robust, reliable, both for performance capture and everything else. So that's kind of a big job. This is going to be handled by Thomas Kilkenny, right? So Thomas and Rich are going to be working together to deliver this awesome performance capture feature set. On the Vcam side, a few things to mention as well, right? So actor replication is something that's been refined, and it's a way for, like, I think a good example of this is with Vcams and/or like controller input, right? So if you're in a collaborative session, like a lot of Vcam sessions will make use of both of these things, and it was just hard to. We found that it was very hard to share that across the multi-user session. Right, because it's one actor, like maybe multiple people are touching it, and it would be cumbersome to edit them at the same time. So with multi-user application, you can replicate actors in real time. You can just pick an actor, pick some properties, and it's going to be replicated live. It's not based on the transaction system, which you can still use for regular changes that you don't need to be immediate. And it's useful for things like virtual camera and controller input. So like for a controller, for example, you can set up the controller. It typically goes to one of the computers that are in the session. And now instead of having to figure out a way to like duplicate the actual input, you can just duplicate the actor that it's applying to, and that's going to go out to all of the rest of the clients in the multi-user session. Also, if you're making blueprint tools, you no longer need to wrap changes into a transaction. So this should hopefully lighten the load for something that you are building into a blueprint that you want to happen live during whatever it is that you're doing in multi-user. Another thing we've added on the camera side is Overscan officially. So all camera actors have Overscan. This is built in, and we have optional resolution scaling and crop. This value gets passed over to Movie Render Queue. If you set it on the camera, you can also set it directly in Movie Render Queue. And the example of this would be like you're using Overscan, maybe you're going to be able to improve the screen space post-processing accuracy. Maybe you're going to add camera shake in post, right? So this is a common camera attribute that just was missing, and now it's in there. And then kind of last but not least, you can distort the image with a lens file, including Overscan. On the lens calibration side, we've moved the solver over to like production ready. A lot of work has gone into improving the accuracy of the camera solver. We're able to leverage a little bit more of the tracking information to make it so that you don't have to precisely mount the tracking devices to the same degree. There's also some rendering improvements where the lens distortion is applied as part of TSR. So you should get better visual results. And then on the workflow side, you're able to run the lens calibration and the nodal offset at the same time instead of as separate steps. For Vcam, there are some features that are oriented around like being able to visualize the stuff that you've already recorded a little bit easier. So there's a bookmarks browser with thumbnails, right? So when you make bookmarks, you'll be able to find them much easier thanks to these thumbnails. And then likewise, there's a take carousel, right? So any of your recorded takes will now automatically have thumbnails. And so when you're browsing for prior takes to pull them up, you'll be able to see them. We'll kind of close out with another new initiative that we're looking into for the engine, which has to do with shots, right? So I use the Mircat a lot for all of my own testing. I'm sure a lot of people in the room, it's oftentimes their first project, right? It's a really great project to learn, but ultimately it's a small project. I think it's like 20 shots, right? So if you think about using Unreal and scaling out that usage, you're gonna be like expanding out to like potentially hundreds or thousands of shots. And this is hard to do in Unreal, right? So this is kind of leading us to this question, right? What is a shot in Unreal Engine? It could be a great number of things, right? It's a level sequence, it could be the animation, maybe what about your lighting? Where do all these assets live in the content browser? So to that end is a little bit of like an existential question to some degree. So that's why we have somebody who majored in philosophy assigned to this feature. It's Thomas Kilkenny. And so Tom is going to be leading the charge on this shot setup, and it's kind of a sprawling project, and there's a lot to figure out. We see a lot of people build systems that are just like creating a shot. Like we want the shot to be a certain name. We want to put the shot in the correct folder. That's all kind of part of it. And then on the sequencer side, what is the shot can be many things with all the subscenes. Like how do we organize that? We talk a lot about, or we think a lot about editorial integration for Sequencer. And you think, oh, it should be really easy, right? Like they're both timelines. Why can't we just move them back and forth? Like I've always been of the belief that, we need to know knowing what the shot is like the key to figuring that out, right? That's what gives us a reliable mapping that we can go back and forth between other editing systems. And so there's a lot to figure out here. I think that we'd love to talk to anybody that's kind of, especially people who have built shot systems or people who have thoughts on how they organize shots, how they think about shots within the engine. It's a big project. I would love to talk to you about this afterwards, and we'll connect you up to Thomas for some follow-ups. But it's kind of a little bit of a research project, but we're still trying to identify work that we can do starting in 5.6. It's going to take several releases for us to get there, but we believe it's like a really important foundational piece for us in terms of moving things forward for all types of film and TV projects. That's it for me. Hopefully we have some time for questions. How did I do? Yeah.